We are now joined by one of the original voices of this great radio station. You hear him call Met games. He's the sound of spring now for a generation of Met fans. And that, of course, is the great Howie Rose. Howie, Tiki, Evan, how you been?
I'm fine, guys. How are you?
We're good. Obviously, today's a sad day. The loss of Buddy Harrelson. For those who are younger, for even those that are my age, because I remember growing up with Buddy as a manager, and obviously Buddy with the Long Island Ducks, and Buddy always being around and being the nicest guy.
Or like me, I grew up in Virginia,
or
so
like Tiki.
I'm not familiar.
Can you tell Tiki and a lot of our audience kind of who Bud Harrelson was?
He was exactly as he portrayed himself, and what you saw when he was with the Ducks or at any other appearance that he made. He was every man in the sense that, you know, he wasn't built like a behemoth as so many athletes are nowadays. Despite that, he was as tough as they came. And I think that probably the best example I could give of what Buddy meant to the team, and it might not be the most glamorous example because it seems today everybody wants to talk about the fight with Pete Rose, but never mind that. In 1973, when one by one key Mets players went down with injury to the point where they were in last place right about the end of August, well, right around that time, Buddy came back from a long-term injury. I believe he had broken his sternum. And when he came back, you could see that entire infield coalesce. He and Felix Millan were arguably the best double play combination the Mets ever had, with a possible exception, really, of Edgardo Alfonso and Ray Ordonez, in my opinion. But what Buddy meant to that team, apart from just the 69 champions, was what, you know, any other catalytic force would mean to any other sports team. You know, you could just, it's not about a given at bat or even a given play in the field. It's just this aura about his presence on the field, which made everybody better.
Yeah, no, it's a sad moment, I think, for Met fans, and that's for those to know. And you grew up, he was your favorite player when you were growing up.
Well, one of them.
Why was he one of your favorite players? Simply because he seemed like an overachiever?
He was one of a handful of favorite players that had Tiki on that team, and a lot of it had to do with the fact that I felt like we grew up together.
Yeah,
you know, I was 8 years old when the Mets were born in 1962. And Buddy was 10 years older than me. And I think there are a lot of us in my age range, among my contemporaries, who, because Buddy got so close to the fan base, you almost looked at him as a big brother. And I've been saying this all day, whether on social media or other interviews I've done, that if you were a Bud Harrelson fan in the New York area and you never met him, you just weren't trying very hard, because he was so available. And I mean that in every sense of the word, not just that if you went to the ballpark, you'd see him, but he seemingly never said no to a request by any charitable organization. He was so great with kids. I've seen so many testimonials to that on social media today, and I just smile and read them all because that was Buddy. And so, for however many of us had a personal relationship with him, I think we could all feel as though we really knew him because he was one of us.
Watching him as a kid, interviewing him on Mets Extra, getting to know him, talk about your relationship and getting to know Bud Harrelson.
Oh, we were just friends, you know, as you would be with anybody else who you develop a certain rapport with. And I remember back in, 1988, when I played in Mets fantasy camp. Buddy, in fact, was one of the owners of that camp, as I recall, at that time. In those days, they called it Dream Week. And we were going to have that particular week down in Tampa. You know why? It was because that was the year that the Mets opened their new complex in Port St. Lucie. And since fantasy camp, or Dream Week, was in earlier mid-February, just before spring training starts, they didn't want us to be the first slugs to use that complex.
Makes sense.
So they moved, seriously, so they moved the entire operation to Tampa, where the Cincinnati Reds used to train. And anyway, when, Buddy found out that I was going to play as one of the participants during the day and then do my radio show at night from the lobby of the hotel, he said to me, hey, let's meet at the Shea Stadium one morning. We'll go into the batting cage and I'll throw Beat Pete to you just because you're probably pretty rusty, which was an understatement to be sure. But I mean, that was Buddy. You know, come on. He gave of his time so I would enjoy that week more before it even got started. That was Buddy.
It's so cool that he spends the majority of his career with the Mets. He coaches on a championship team. He gets to manage the team. I mean, he really completed the triple threat of being able to do everything with an organization, which is so cool.
Well, for one thing, he revered, as so many of his teammates did, Gil Hodges. So much so that when Buddy went to Philadelphia, which I believe was in the 1978 season, he took Gil's number 14.
Oh, wow.
And the irony of it all is that I'm not sure if Buddy played more than that 1 year in Philadelphia, but the guy who wore number 14 for the Phillies the folling year, Pete Rose.
I was going to say.
You know, so they were connected again in a somewhat, more furrier way, I suppose, but it was still a connection that many people have referred back to today. And they became good friends, too, because how could you not be Buddy Harrelson's friend?
No doubt. We're talking to the great Howie Rose, one of the originals at this station. I've gone on YouTube. I've gotten stuck in the YouTube paradox like a lot of us have. And I hear, no doubt. And for some reason, I like hearing clips of Joe from Saddle River. That's Joe Beningo. Calling Howie Rose to tell about all the moves the Mets need to make. They got to get this guy. They got to get that guy. Is there any day you wake up and say, boy, I miss that? I should do shows on WFAN so I could hear Met fans complain and demand which player they want on their team.
Well, I'll tell you what. My favorite day of the week to work was a Monday during the football season.
Oh, yes.
And the reason for that is that one of my first callers would be Joe from Saddle River. And I don't know if either of you are going to get this comparison, but I apologize just for being old. but Joe from Saddle River, a.k.a. Joe Beningo, was, to my radio show, what Inagata-Davida was to a disc jockey. Inagata-Davida, and obviously you never heard it.
No, I have no idea. We're lost.
a song. It was a song by the less than legendary group Iron Butterfly, which came out in the 1960s. It ran for probably about 13 minutes. And so when Beningo would call me to opine about the Jets game of the day before, I knew, just as any disc jockey did when they played Inagata-Davida, that I had about 13 minutes to go to the bathroom, paper, go roam around the station, and come back and know that Joe would not have missed a punctuation mark.
Right. Well, you know, here's something very coincidental. We do the same thing to Joe on Mondays after the Jets games. Hey, Joe, come on.
Just leave the building and come back, and he wouldn't have missed a beat.
Well, one day Tiki did.
Oh, yeah, I saw that. Right. I know what's going on, even though I'm down here in Florida.
How do you like living down there in Florida?
Oh, I love it. I just love it. I'm not a winter guy. You know, people ask me, why'd you give up hockey? I didn't really give up hockey as much as I gave up winter.
Yeah.
I mean, who knows? If they play hockey during the summer, maybe I'd still be doing hockey. Who knows? But unfortunately, Florida is not very Floridian lately. We've had a brutal winter with weather. I won't bore you with the details, but it's
Howie, my brother said the same thing. He said it's cold as it's ever been down there.
Too bad.
I know.
Too bad.
I want my money back.
Yeah, right.
I do have one current Met question for you. Right now, I have a big beard on my face, and I'm doing that out of loyalty to Pete Alonso. I want Pete Alonso.
Is that what I saw today? Wait a minute. Is that picture actually of you today?
No. That's what he's going to become if it goes for another 3 or so months.
Yes, I tweeted out a picture of a wrestler by the name of Sami Zayn who's got red hair that's long and a beard. I'm not there yet.
Well, it looks like Justin Turner. I thought there was a message there.
He does. I may eventually look like that because I want Pete Alonso to be on this team forever because we don't have a lot of this, like in the history of the franchise. We don't have a long list of guys who are just career Mets. And I understand as disappointed I was about DeGrom. I get why it didn't work out. Obviously, the Mets turned out to make the right decision. As you sit here today, as a guy that has seen it all from the beginning, how important is it to you that Pete Alonso is a career Met, and do you think it's going to happen?
Well, you have to separate pragmatism from emotion. And I think I can best explain how this will unfold by creating the scenario that every team goes through when they get into a situation such as where the Mets are going to be with Alonso. And that is going to play this year at age 29. And assuming he either doesn't sign an extension during the season or doesn't get traded, and even if he does, still his following season, the first year of a potential new, very expensive, presumably, long-term, presumably contract, is going to be his age 30 season. So why does that matter? Because now what teams have the ability to do is draw from a various group of biomechanical data and metrics and analytics that can best inform an organization what this player is going to look like in year 2 of a deal, in year 4 of a deal, in year 6 of a deal. So what do they take into consideration? Well, they take into consideration his body type, his injury history, how he hits a certain level of pitching at a much more sophisticated level than I can even understand it, never mind explain it. But they've got all this information now that they can draw from. And I think that's what's going to go into this. They're going to have to create a metric that tells them this is what we think he's going to be worth, to the point that it doesn't become an albatross at some point. Now, most of these contracts, quite frankly, do. Max Scherzer's did not to the Washington Nationals. Even Carlos Beltran, the best free agent the Mets ever signed. Why? Because he was about 27 years old when they signed him, but he broke down along the way. And I don't think there was anything they could have seen analytically then that would have even suggested that. It was just a series of things that happened. And so you have to project that some of that is going to take place with virtually anyone. And what no team wants to do is get caught in a situation, say, that the Angels did when they signed Albert Pujols to that long-term deal and essentially wound up subsidizing the declining years of Pujols' career, which they were paying as a reward for what he did with another team, the St. Louis Cardinals. So I think that, again, separating emotion here, that's going to be a big part of this scenario.
You know what's weird, and I know that David Stearns probably wouldn't agree with what I'm about to say, and I'm curious if you would. The David Wright contract didn't work. Unfortunately, David had a back issue, and he never got to fulfill that contract. Yet, as a fan, I look back at that and say, I'm glad they signed him. Because the idea of him going somewhere else and wearing another jersey, even if it was only for a couple of years, would have just been horrible. So even though that didn't work, and obviously you want to hand out smart contracts, I would prefer to take the risk just knowing that my guy – a generation ago, David Wright, 2 generations ago would have been Darryl Strawberry. That guy will never wear another uniform. And to me, there's a big value in that. I'm not sure the front office would see that at all.
But the front office can't allow them to see it simply like that. It's a consideration. Yeah. And it may not only be a serious consideration, it may be the consideration that ultimately wins the day. I can't speak to what they're going to do.
Right.
But that's going to be a dilemma because, look, Steve Cohen did not get to where he is by making rash, emotional decisions that were bereft of any financial sense. Now, maybe you look back and say, some baseball contracts fall into that category. They make no sense, but you wanted to keep this player because he was a fan favorite, and if you've got the financial wherewithal to do it, then you do it.
Yeah.
And that may well be how this shakes out. I can't put a percentage of value on whether they're going to re-sign Pete or not because I'm not the one who's in the room when they have to make those decisions. And what I just described in terms of the factors that go into those decisions being made probably just scratch the surface. There's so much that goes into it that I'm not even aware of in all likelihood.
Yeah. Well, Howie, here's the thing that I worry about. Like we saw this with Aaron Judge on the other side of town, where it maybe got a little contentious. We didn't hear much about it, but it did until it became sentimental, right? They reached out. They said, look, we really want you here. They got the final offer. Judge is here. It's a long-term contract. As you mentioned about the breakdown metrics, he gets hurt the next year, right? So we know that the value is not fully going to be realized because he didn't play a lot of last season. But that
was a freak injury. But
he did have an injury history, right? And I'm on Judge's side. Every one of his injuries, I'll tell you, was freak, right? Diving for a ball, misdiagnosed, all those other things that come into it. But with Pete, like you're already starting to hear he's so aggrieved by this that he'd rather play somewhere else. And you never heard that with Judge. So I wonder how contentious this gets.
Well, I wonder how credible those quote sources even are.
Right.
I mean, who's saying that? You know,
Right.
we saw what happened last year when one of your brethren suggested that Pete was a divisive influence or even a cancer within the clubhouse, and that was just so wrong and so far removed from reality. It doesn't even really merit any further discussion. But, you know, we all have to kind of take that element of noise, which is all it really is, and just put it on a shelf, because at the end of the day, it may very well be that a certain level of emotion will tip the scales in favor of the Mets making the kind of offer that Pete finds acceptable. But in no way do I believe right now. I don't know Pete well. I mean, I know him probably as well as, you know, any team broadcaster would. I think I know him well enough to believe that in his heart he really wants to stay here. And I don't believe that his mind is already elsewhere because they haven't necessarily reached out. I don't know if they've reached out or not. Maybe they haven't at all. But I still firmly believe that in his perfect world, he remains a Met. That's my opinion.
I agree with you, and my wife hopes so too, because she's getting sick of the beard and she wants it cut. Howie, I appreciate you coming on. We love talking to you. Thank you very much. And opening day is just around the corner.
Yeah, right. Appreciate you, Howie.
My pleasure, guys. Don't rush it. I'm still waiting for the weather to warm up.
I got you. The great Howie Rose, one of the original voices at WFAN.